Dear viewers, our topic today is Poststructuralism and Focault's theory of power. According to Alex Kalinko's, Poststructuralism can be subdivided into textual poststructuralism and worldly poststructuralism. In this discussion, we are more concerned with worldly poststructuralism than with textual poststructuralism. The interest in power and its working is an important aspect of worldly poststructuralism. It derives mainly from the works of Michel Foucault. In his works, Foucault focuses on the social developments of Enlightenment period. He highlights the Enlightenment desire for the regulation of society on a rationalized basis. Foucault seeks to expose the way power works through discursive formations in society. He is of the view that new sciences like psychiatry, criminology, and biology are deeply repressive. They have created general norms and standards that divest people of their individual identities. Strangely enough, people willingly embrace these norms of rationality, which act as straitjackets. Foucault propounds his concept of power in his book Discipline and Punish: The Birth of the Prison. One section of the book, entitled Panopticism, deals with the repressive measures taken by early modern society to deal with contagious diseases like leprosy and the plague. In the Enlightenment period, lepers were simply excluded from social intercourse. In case the plague broke out, people were confined to their houses and constantly surveilled. In this connection, Foucault says inspection functions ceaselessly. The gaze is alert everywhere. The term the gaze is the gaze of surveillance, which means close observation or constant watching of someone. It also means monitoring of behavior. This imprisonment symbolizes how in the modern world the individual is constantly monitored and inspected. Talking about the surveillance system, Foucault says the individual is constantly located, examined, and distributed among the living beings, the sick, and the dead. All this constitutes a compact model of the disciplinary mechanism. Foucault also says the political dream of the plague is the penetration of regulation into even the smallest details of everyday life, and that the capillary functioning of power is responsible for the assignment to each individual of his true name, his true place, his true body, his true disease. The surveillance system is not based on a massive binary division between one set of people and another, but on a distribution of power through many channels and over a large number of individuals. Foucault's metaphor for this surveillance system is that of the panopticon, a type of prison designed by the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. This ideal prison consisted of a ring of cells built around one single point of observation from which one single guardian could survey all the cells. However, the prisoner could not see the supervisor. He never knew if he was being watched. This was the major effect of the panopticon. It aimed at inducing in the inmates a state of conscious and permanent visibility that assured the automatic functioning of power. According to Foucault, the panopticon was designed to sustain a power relation independent of the person who exercised it. It caught up the inmates in a power situation of which they themselves were the bearers. When Foucault says a real subjection is born mechanically from a fictitious relation, we are reminded of Althusser's definition of ideology as a representation of the imaginary relationship of individuals to their conditions of existence. For Foucault, the panopticon stands for the modern world, in which we, its citizens, are the bearers of our own figurative mental imprisonment. The concept of the panopticon is admirably described in Ken Case's novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The novel takes place in a mental institution where patients are kept under constant surveillance. The patients regularly take part in group sessions for the therapeutic purposes. Surprisingly enough, many of the inmates have come to the institution on a wholly voluntary basis. They wanted to conform to the outside world's standard of normality, which convinced them that they were abnormal and needed treatment. It means that they have completely internalized a discourse about normality. The only person who escaped this discourse about normality was the one who had never gone to school or church. Ironically, unlike most of the others, he is not free to go. Now we shall discuss what discourse is and how it is related to the concept of panopticon. Foucault attributes our acceptance of the panoptical state of affairs to his theory of power. It has clearly much in common with Althusser's ideology and Gramsci's hegemony because it rules by consent. We believe what power tells us. In fact, just like Althusser's ideology, it gives us a sense of belonging and contributes to our well-being. Talking about the functioning of power, Foucault says, it does not only weigh on us as a force that says no, but it induces pleasure, forms knowledge, produces discourse. It needs to be considered as a productive network which runs throughout the whole social body. It implies that we obey power, are loyal to it, even to the point of policing ourselves, because it makes us feel what we are. Now, power works through discourses and discursive formations. Discourse refers to the way a language is manipulated to communicate a certain effect or elicit a certain response. According to Foucault, a discourse is a series of sentences or propositions. It can be defined as a large group of statements that belong to a single system of formation, which is normally called discursive formation. A given discourse establishes a field within which propositions about a particular subject can be formulated that could not be formulated without it. The creation of the field makes it possible to relate phenomena that seemed discrete and unconnected. Such a discourse then produces claims to knowledge, and it is these claims that give it its power. In other words, a discourse is based on interconnected assumptions that make knowledge possible. Internalization of a particular discourse gives it power. Thus, knowledge and power are intimately interlinked. Knowledge is a way to define and categorize others. Instead of emancipating us from ignorance, it leads to surveillance and discipline. In the past, false claims to knowledge have served as instruments of power of social suppression. For example, stereotypical representations of masculinity and femininity were considered natural by people of the past. The term false claim implies that there are also correct claims to knowledge. For Foucault, however, that distinction is irrelevant. At this point, Foucault's theory of worldly poststructuralism shows the traces of textualism or textual poststructuralism. He is of the view that knowledge is the product of a certain discourse and has no validity outside it. It reminds us of Derrida, who said there is nothing outside the text. It implies that the truths of the human sciences are the effect of discourses of language. Their knowledge does not derive from access to the real world, to authentic reality, but from the rules of their discourses. It implies that knowledge only counts as knowledge because we accept it as such. It only counts as knowledge because the discourse in question is powerful enough to make us believe that it is knowledge. Therefore, knowledge is enabled by the rules of a certain discourse, which decide what qualifies as knowledge and what does not. In the context of worldly post-structuralism, discourse becomes associated with power. Thus, knowledge is produced by power, by the means that establish the credibility of a discourse. Power and knowledge mutually benefit from each other in constant interaction, just as monarchy and the clergy supported each other in the Middle Ages. As mentioned earlier, Focault is not interested in establishing which discourses are false and which are true. He is, on the other hand, interested in the discursive formation that governs a discourse and holds it together. The term discursive formation is used for the underlying principles or rules through which propositions acquire the status of knowledge. These rules determine what counts as knowledge with regard to the field in which they operate and thus establish bodies of knowledge that apply to us all. Such discourses determine the way we talk and think about different matters. Like language in general, they operate independently and perpetuate themselves through their users. Since we are all extensions of the discourses that we have internalized, we ourselves constantly reproduce their power even in our intimate relations. Discourses work like Gramsci's hegemony and Althusser's ideology. We so internalize them that they even induce pleasure. In the final analysis, it can be said that Foucault's analysis of the way discourses operate in the society is closely related to worldly post-structuralism, though it also shares some assumptions of textual post-structuralism. Foucault places language in the center of social power rather than textual power. Discourse ensures the implementation of certain ideological beliefs and values in society. It asserts itself through the hegemonic power of language. Thank you very much.